guy who gobbled horse goo. Rest in peace, Wheezy. So what's your reaction to that?
It really is really deeply concerning that, a public figure would advocate that patients should be treated differently, based on whether they got a vaccine or not. And, it really emanates from what happened with COVID, where it became really sort of a litmus test as to how you were behaving to the risks around COVID. And of course, it really diverged from actually what was going on in terms of who was really getting sick, the focused protection idea, looking at patients who were older, that we should protect more versus, not penalizing, younger kids and eliminating them from the culture. And then once the vaccine came out, really looking at the data as to, well, who would benefit from the vaccine, who needs it, who doesn't need it, who might it be harming with some adverse effects, as we were seeing some young men were having potentially a signal related to myocarditis. So really, a complex mix of medical decision making that happens. And for me, was on the front lines at the beginning and still works in the ER. So I was in the ER before COVID, the roll up to it during COVID, and now after. So much of the information that really got scaled up in the media, and it was whether it was conservative media or traditional mainstream media, really was different than what was the experience going on in the hospital or the clinic with the patient. And so to have it get to a place where a comedian and then other people in positions of thought to be trusted positions like the CDC, really demonizing patients is really just unconscionable. It is just really not something that ethical doctors do or an ethical healthcare system.
No, absolutely. I mean, this video that you made comes to mind, a video you made for FAIR, where you talk about, treating someone with a scar on their face, realizing that they're probably a Nazi or a Nazi sympathizer, reflecting on the fact that you're Jewish, and of course treating them as you would any other patient, which is for quite some time what has been, the approach. This is the Hippocratic Oath, do no harm, you treat everybody.
So anyone can come through the door. There's a lot of people that come to the ER that it's not necessarily an emergency. Maybe they need a medication refill, or there's a variety of social ills, or we deal with drug abuse. People, who have, Nazi tattoos. The thing is, I'm there, I'm trained to take care of everyone. That's my duty. What they're doing outside, that's not the issue at hand. I mean, if somehow that's a role in, weakening their health, I would talk about that, obviously, with alcohol and drug abuse. But someone's political belief, has nothing to do with my duty to take care of them and address the medical issue at hand. And that's really been the tradition of healthcare that, in part, came out of the Nuremberg trials, with all the horrors from Nazi Germany and experimentation they did. It's concerning that medical students and trainees are taught, to other people or the oppressor-oppressed context, where they would consider not even necessarily treating someone that they had a different political belief. And that's just not at all ethical medicine.
Just in general, when did you notice that something was going wrong? And what did you see with this?
It really, I think, hit home once I got out of all my training into actual practice with this group that was basically a small business. We had contract staffing ERs. Before that, when you're training, at least back in that time, you're somewhat shielded from the business side of medicine. You're there very academic, and yes, there's issues with the electronic health record and billing, which, we could talk about later. But really, at the time, the electronic health record was very rudimentary, so it wasn't like a main thing. I started out, we would document on paper charts. So it really, the business of medicine, once I finished training and joined a private group, was just really, a shocker. And it was just seeing the inside of the whole thing, where it was like how much money we had to spend in order to extract the money from the insurance companies to get paid. And again, this was like, people come to the ER, you can't refuse care. If someone came and they had a heart attack and we send them to the cath lab and a million things, they could maybe never pay the bill and we would never get paid. But yet legally, would still potentially someone could sue us. So there were kind of all these just realities of the business side that were really shocking, because you learn like, oh, well, we're going to get paid less this quarter because the fee for the billing company went up. That would be one example. I think the other thing was the relationship with the hospital. Again, we're a private group, and the contracts are written where is like certain quality metrics had to be implemented, and you had to achieve them in order to like have your contract be whole. So some things were in alignment with practicing medicine, like you gave an aspirin to everyone who came in with chest pain. But some things delved into this whole world of the patient experience scores, where how the patient felt about their experience had to be a certain number. And once I learned what that was all about, it was shocking. I mean, it's part of the administrative state, because it's written into regulations that the hospital wouldn't get paid if their scores weren't at a certain number. And so then the pressure rolls downhill. So if medicine isn't about making a patient happy, it's about solving their medical problem. And as some people come to the ER with things that I can't make them happy about, they may have some, chronic pain issues, or they may have seen 10 specialists and frustrated about why a certain issue can't get solved. And the clinic would say, just go to the ER. So people would get sent to us inappropriately, thinking like we were somehow going to solve a problem, or told to come because I would get them an MRI, but we didn't have instantaneous, ability to get an MRI for non-emergent things. So they would be upset and then give you a bad score. So it was like completely unfair. So once I saw, and when you'd say to the administration, like, this is unfair, they were just like, oh, well, this is what we have to do. This is what the government requires. And so it just was like some of the things were inconsistent with the actual practice of medicine, and got more into the consumer, like what the patient feels their experience was.
See, that's very interesting, because this is all not even thinking about, these various woke ideologies and how they started penetrating, the medical system.
Yeah, well, I think that we are clearly at the end of a cycle. I know a lot of people kind of say this with a lot of things, but for healthcare, I think when Medicare and Medicaid, started in 1965, I think that's when the clock started, ticking, in the sense that it became political, right? And there became, lobbyists and needing to always go to Congress, and they're all of a sudden involved in healthcare. And I think that there's been a slow decline in autonomy for physicians and pressure on wages. And I think that physicians were really organized to be battling against that. I mean, the AMA doesn't really represent physicians. Their revenue is from their billing codes. So a chest pain has a certain code. They own all that, and they're the gatekeepers for it. So you can't get a new code unless you go through the AMA. So the point is, the AMA there's really not an organized pushback for physicians. And I think what's happened is as I think the autonomy and the wages have declined, I think that some physicians have gone into administration as a way to kind of keep their wages up, or to feel some sense of control and power in the equation. So whether it's administration in the hospital, which then they're sort of on the other side of the equation, right? It's like they might know it's not right to kind of say, oh, hey, we need those patient satisfaction scores higher, but they're not, on the clinical side anymore. I think some, people truly enjoy academics are in that, but I think some, have stayed in that or risen the ranks where they're not as much doing to the insurance companies and middlemen. I saw a lot of some of the smartest doctors in my group basically retire early, leave, or go into health tech. There's people that have gone into different areas in terms of autonomy, creativity, increasing their wages, but the actual clinical practice of medicine continues to have been marginalized, and letting nurse practitioners, physician assistants kind of have a lot of medical decision making, which they don't have the same level of training. We're seeing more of that. And the reason how the woke comes in is I think that it is real easy to pick off the medical industry because physicians are in a weakened position. It's easy to infiltrate also the administrative state aspect, where the woke side and corporate medicine knows that the way to get their policy prescriptions through is through the administrative state, through regulations. And they're very, very knowledgeable about it, very good. That's their business model. There's such a big administrative state blob in healthcare that a lot of policy prescriptions, again, would come down from people who actually don't interact with patients.
And with that, we'll be right back.
Joining us now to discuss the document, we have Colin Wright. He is an evolutionary biologist and founding editor of Reality's Last Stand. Colin Wright, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me again.
Now, the American College of Pediatricians has issued its position after reviewing more than 60 studies on mental health in adolescents with gender dysphoria. Now, it concluded, quote, "There is no long-term evidence that mental health concerns are decreased or alleviated after gender-affirming therapy." Now, how significant is this finding?
It's a very significant statement because the statement by the American College of Pediatricians, this came out as the rest of the world has been coming to sanity on this issue and moving away from doing gender-affirming care procedures as they have performed more systematic reviews of the evidence that all show that there's no good benefits of long-term benefits for these types of interventions. So really, this statement by the ACP sort of adds to the mounting pressure on the AAP, the America's largest professional group of pediatricians, to conduct their own transparent systematic review of the evidence, which they're currently in the process of performing.
Now, supporters of this type of gender transitioning treatments have argued that it saves lives by reducing suicide in youth. Now, the report found the opposite. It said that suicide and suicide attempts actually was really high among those who have received the treatments. What do you make of the lack of evidence in the medical community that then leads to these types of treatments?
So a lot of the studies just are poorly designed. They're almost designed to fail and not actually test for the factor of interest, which is, are kids who are claiming to have gender dysphoria, are they more likely to be committing suicide or have suicidal ideation? And the comparison should be to other similar youth with similar mental health conditions. They usually tend to just compare these kids who claim to be trans with just the normal kids who don't have any other mental health conditions. And then all of their mental health conditions are seen as a result of their gender dysphoria instead of the other way around. So when you actually control for things like pre-existing mental health conditions, the differences we have in suicide rates is completely eliminated.